Keith Richards said about Mick Jagger, he said, he's an interesting bunch of guys. And I wonder, when you have someone who has tried to control his media personality to the extent to which Mick Jagger has, someone who, as you write in your book, says, I don't remember a great deal of times, a great many times when he's asked about the past. How do you begin writing a book about someone like this?
Well, of course, you begin, in my case, by writing a book about the Beatles, because the Beatles and the Stones were so closely linked. They were supposed to be such enemies, such rivals. They weren't. They were very good friends. They collaborated. They almost merged at one point, had the same office and the same recording studio. Brian Epstein, the Beatles manager, could have managed the Stones at one point. They really got on well together, these Liverpudlians and these Londoners, London area boys. You'd think they were so different, but in fact, Mick Jagger and John Lennon were very good friends right up until almost till the end of Lennon's life. And it was while I was doing my Beatles book that I met Andrew Loog Oldham, who was the inspirational manager of the Stones, who really invented Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger was a blues singer, not particularly confident, didn't expect to make a lot of money because the blues didn't make money. The Stones were a blues band who did blues covers, and Andrew Oldham said to him, because Andrew Oldham realized the Beatles were getting a little bit safe now. By 1963, mums and dads and grandparents even started to love the Beatles. Andrew Oldham realized he could invent a band of anti-Beatles who just didn't have to be that bad, but they just wouldn't have to smile and bow and be, and simper and be nice. And Andrew Oldham really said to Mick, if you pretend to be wicked, you'll get rich. And Mick said, okay. And that's what he's been doing for 50 years, pretending to be wicked.
Well, do you think it's safe to say, then, that Andrew Loog Oldham and not Mick Jagger really invented the idea of the modern rock star?
Yes. He didn't immediately do that because the Stones and Mick were launched as just a pop group. They wore matching uniforms. But Andrew Oldham began to see that the real market was for some bad boys. There really hadn't been any bad boys. Rock and rollers were thought to be bad boys, like Elvis Presley, but they all were people who'd learned to sing in church. I mean, they were extremely nice, well-brought-up young Americans. But if you could invent these sort of lawless, these outlaws who just challenged all the mores of the day, up to that point, pop groups had tried to go mainstream, go into movies and learn to tap dance. The Stones were never going to do that.
Well, you talk in the book about a famous television show where at the end of the show, everyone goes up and they stand on a balcony and they wave, and the Stones just said, no way. It's what everyone's done before us, and we're not going to do it that way.
All the great American rock and rollers who'd visited, it's the London Palladium, and it was the Sunday night show from the London Palladium, and the Stones wouldn't get on the revolving platform and wave goodbye with the showgirls and the other and the other artistes, like
tap dancers and things. That could be anybody, right?
But, it was like sort of cartoon rabbits, and conjurers and magicians. And this caused absolute revulsion throughout the nation. They wouldn't get on the revolving platform of the London Palladium. And it wasn't very long after that that the British establishment thought this has gone too far. These boys have got to be taken down a few pegs, particularly this Mick Jagger. And that's when this raid was conducted on Keith's cottage in Sussex. And as a result of that raid, Mick and Keith were both put on trial for the most minute drugs offences, particularly in Mick's case. Mick was caught in possession of 4 travel sickness pills that had amphetamine content, were legal throughout Europe, but not in the UK.
Well, he had bought them in Italy, right? Legally, I think, right?
And in fact, they belonged to his girlfriend, Marianne Faithfull.
Right.
And like the true English gent that he can often be, Mick said, her career couldn't stand this, and he would take the rap.
But he didn't hold up very well. When it all really started to happen, he didn't hold up well because he went to jail. For not very long, but he went to jail. Well,
in fact, you can say that he did hold up well because nobody expected, not even the police, expected him and Keith to get jail terms.
Right.
The police said this minor offence should get probation or a caution. He was in jail in Lewes for a couple of nights, and then he was put into Brixton Prison. And of course, a young man in those days to go into a really tough prison, which he now says he can't remember which prison it was. But afterwards, he could have sued people. He could have gone a round of the chat shows saying my prison ordeal. He could have written a book about it. He simply didn't. He just went on with his life. Now that's Mick. Of course, he wants to get on with the future, never the past. But it shows a sort of amazing dignity that you can't imagine a young pop star today showing it at all.
Well, it's interesting because I think he's a conundrum. He's lots of different things. As you say, he showed that he was the English gentleman that he could sometimes be. But he was also outrageous, at least in his behavior in public, in his personal life, with the way he treated women frequently. He was not always very nice. But I think that in those days, do you think that he made such a name for himself because it was easier to shock people then than it would be today?
It was very easy to shock people. I mean, going to the Savoy Hotel without a tie, it went off the graph. The public revulsion and shock. But still, Andrew Oldham pumped up this.
Right.
He put it out to the press that the Stones were dirty. Because they had long hair. They were all obsessive hair washers. Brian Jones washed his hair twice a day. He was called Mr. Shampoo by the others. Charlie Watts, I talked to someone who had a brief affair with Charlie Watts, and she said Charlie's underwear was cleaner than hers. And Mick, if you see early footage of Mick on stage, he glows with cleanliness, glows with it. He's just come out of the laundromat, But still, it was, the kids love this idea of these vagabonds.
My guest in studio is Philip Norman. He's the author of Mick Jagger. It's in fine and I guess not so fine bookstores everywhere right now. You can buy it online. We'll be back to continue our conversation about Mick Jagger and his fascinating new book, the book by Philip Norman.
It's Extra Entertainment from Entertainment Extra with Richard Crouse on In-Depth Radio, NewsTalk 1010.
Welcome back to Extra Entertainment Extra. I'm Richard Crouse. My guest in studio, Philip Norman. He is the author of Mick Jagger. It's in bookstores everywhere right now. It is a 600-page look at the life of arguably one of the most famous men on the planet still to this day. Even though he turns 70 next year, he has been a superstar for 50 years.
That's right, and you would never have imagined in the 1960s that the Stones would last this long, because they were the most unstable of all the bands in the 60s. Two of them went to jail. One of them was found dead in his swimming pool. They owed the taxman a huge fortune. They had to get out of the country. Two more of the members over time quit, in great bitterness, and yet they were the ones that lasted.
Well, you say in the book that without Mick, the Stones would have been over by 1968.
I think that, yes, that's true. After the bust, when Mick and Keith were in jail, any other group would have been finished. But Mick was very astute, and he realized that they had to put their finances in the hands of someone he could trust. He took on a financial advisor who devised a strategy where they could get back to America, go back on tour. It took a long, long time, but they were virtually broke by the end of the 60s. Now, if it had been left to Keith Richards, they would now be a tribute band, doing sort of Scarborough, golden oldies once a year with a lot of other pathetic old has-beens. But no, Mick not only kept them going, but kept them somehow being cool and dangerous. These elderly men, grandfathers as they are, young people still think they have this whiff of sort of sulphurous naughtiness.
Well, I think that they may well be, when I think of rock stars, I think of the Rolling Stones. I don't think so much of Axl Rose. I don't think of Scott Weiland. I don't think so much of people that have come after them. Because I think that they, as you talk about in the book, sort of set the template for this and did it better than anybody else.
That's true. Now, the Beatles were not a rock band. They were a pop group, and they were absolutely inimitable as a group. But the Stones really were the first rock band where there was a man out in front without a guitar, but his body was an instrument as much as his voice. And the pattern that Jagger sort of created for the rock star, almost every other charismatic frontman has had to follow in his footsteps. Only Jim Morrison found a new way of holding a microphone. Jim Morrison used to hold the microphone like a frightened baby bird that he was comforting. But the rest of them, they all hold the microphone when the technology was for microphones. They held them like like a phallus, just like Mick did. And all those moves are moves like Jagger. I mean, a really young pop song around is called Moves Like Jagger because they're all his apprentices.
Tell me a little bit about the cover photo. This is a black and white photo. I'm guessing probably from about 1978, something like that.
Yes.
And he looks young. The beginnings of the wrinkles that you talk about in his face are beginning to show here a little bit. But he looks kind of vulnerable but defiant at the same time. And I wonder if that's part of the the aspects of his character that make him so compelling to us.
Well, he doesn't want to be vulnerable. He has never let himself appear vulnerable,
right.
Even on the worst sort of occasions, like the Altamont Festival, when a spectator was stabbed to death in front of the stage. He didn't break down. He wasn't. He wasn't. He didn't seem to be upset, but. Behind the scenes, he is an extremely vulnerable character, yes, and there is a sort of insecurity there. That's the only way you can explain the fact that he has wanted the love of the public so much. It's never enough. It's like rich people are never rich enough.
Right.
Megastars never get enough attention.
Right. Well, you can see all that in the cover photo, and you will see that if you look it up online. If you go to your bookstore, look for Mick Jagger by Philip Norman. It is out in stores right now. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about Mick Jagger and what makes him such a fascinating character.
You're listening to Entertainment Extra. Now more with movie critic Richard Crouse on In Depth Radio. News Talk 1010.
Believe it. 50 years after they started making records, that's a new single from the Rolling Stones. It's called Doom and Gloom. My guest in studio talking about Mick Jagger is Philip Norman. He's the author of the book, Mick Jagger. It's in bookstores and online everywhere right now. Check it out. It's a really fascinating read. And there's stories in here. I thought that I knew everything there was to know about Mick Jagger. And you uncovered things here that even surprised even me. So tell me how long, I mean, these are kind of really basic. How long did you work on this?
This took me 2 years to research and write. Now, that to me wasn't so long after John Lennon. The John Lennon biography took 3 years, and this was a lighter subject. It didn't have the emotional sort of weight of John Lennon. And you do need luck, and I did have. You have to believe in luck, of course, a biographer's luck, and I did have luck. But for instance, yes, this sort of strange, almost psychosis about Mick is that he says he can't remember anything about this amazing career. And although that does sort of fend off awkward questions about his sex life, it cancels out so much real achievement and highs and lows that no one else can match in that line of work at all.
But isn't it about the myth? Though, isn't it? Mick Jagger is a myth builder, and if people, my feeling would be, and you talk about this in the book, if people know too many specifics, the myth seems to float away a little bit, and then part of the magic goes.
It's true, and the millions are in the myth, and he knows that, of course. But still, he never bothers to respond to anything any misinformation. The famous example is the Altamont Festival, where this spectator was knifed by the Hells Angels, and his behaviour was always said to be vain and shallow and callous. And he made the Stones play Sympathy for the Devil when the sun went down and unleashed some kind of satanic force. They weren't playing Sympathy for the Devil. They were playing Under My Thumb and a sort of Muzak version to calm the crowd. And he was almost praying to the crowd to calm down. And he himself behaved with great courage because the Grateful Dead had organised this festival, not the Stones. The Grateful Dead had fled the scene when it started getting nasty, but Mick finished the show. And the stage was covered with these Hells Angels who all looked as if they wanted to kill him as well.
Well, you can see that in the film.
Absolutely.
Now, I went on Facebook. I asked people, what would you like to ask Philip Norman? And I got inundated with questions, and we don't have very much time. But I'm going to ask you a couple of them. You've answered a few of these, but one of the writers wanted to know about the El Macombo. And if you were able, because the El Macombo, the famous show here in Toronto, it's legendary in Toronto and Canada. Did you find out anything new is the question.
There's a lot, really. Again, it's the positive side of Mick. Now, you would think that when Keith is arrested and charged with trafficking, Mick would just fly the scene. Mick was really supportive. He stayed, he organised, he coordinated the defence of Keith. Keith was then under sort of house arrest in America, and Mick and Jerry Hall, who was around by that time, looked after Keith. I mean, like a sort of sick child. Again, this is the positive side. Big Mr. Cool doesn't talk about that. There aren't many people who would have done that.
Right. Shannon Iera finally asks, and this is the last question of the show, do you have the moves like Jagger?
I don't. Only Jagger has the moves like Jagger, and a lot of young musicians wish they did too.
Absolutely. Well, the book is a fascinating read. It's called Mick Jagger by Philip Norman. It's available everywhere. Mr. Norman, it's been a real treat to meet you. As I said earlier in the show, your books have been on my bookshelf and in my hands for many years. It's a real thrill to meet you. If you haven't read Shout, The Beatles in Their Generation, you really owe it to yourself. If you think you know everything there is about the Beatles to know, you don't. Read this book and also check out Mick Jagger by Philip Norman. I'm Richard Crouse. Join us again next week on Extra Entertainment Extra.